Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Who Dares Wins. I'm Rosie Stano, Senior Product Consultant at Candyspace. I'm delighted to be joined with digital experts across Currys, NatWest, Mazda and Candyspace to discuss how senior marketers are leveraging CRO to drive growth. So a few housekeeping things before we begin. If you have got any questions for our panelists, do drop those into the chat box that should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll look to answer as many of these as we can towards the end of the webinar. We'll also be running a couple of polls throughout the webinar and sharing the results as we go, so do keep an eye out for those. And finally, we are recording the session and we will circulate a copy of this afterwards. So again, keep your eyes peeled for your inboxes for that. So I guess to get us started, why don't we launch our first poll? So we're asking you guys, what is preventing your business from getting the most out of CRO? So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. And if you have got any other thoughts that we've not captured here, we'd love to hear those. Please do feel free to drop any comments that you've got in the chat box. I'll just give that a few more seconds and then we'll share the results. Okay, so I think we're ready to share the results. So yeah, interesting. A few of you saying that it's just difficult to have enough time and resource to dedicate to it. Perhaps some things around strategy to develop on as well. So great. Okay, really interesting to know, and hopefully some points that we can touch upon later on in the webinar. Okay, great. So so to kick us off, I would love to introduce to you Matt Simpson, Managing Director at Candyspace. He's going to take us through our opening remarks on the current state of CRO. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Rosie, and hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'm just going to try and share screen now. And hopefully you can all see this. All good? Thumbs up, Rosie?
All good.
All good, thank you. Well, for those of you that aren't familiar with Candyspace, we are a business that designs, builds, and crucially optimizes digital products, so websites and mobile apps on behalf of clients, including ITV, Mazda, who we have here today, Mars, Nestle, Rolls-Royce, and many others. I should also mention you might know us from our two recent Agency of the Year nominations at the Beamer and Drum Awards. So I just thought I'd slip that in. I won't mention that again. Importantly, we're here to talk about CRO. We have just launched a report which actually features contributions from some of the panelists that you're going to hear from very shortly, into the opportunities, the tactics that we think every business needs to be thinking about for 2024 and beyond. If you don't have that yet, I think our crack marketing team will be sending it to you pretty shortly. So just to set the scene a little bit, there couldn't be a more pertinent time to be talking about CRO. We are in extremely challenging economic times at the moment, and all of us, whatever sector we're in, I think operating in very challenging conditions. I was out with some friends on Saturday, and it was just really telling that whatever sector they seem to be working in, they seem to be having a really, really tough time. And that includes friends who are own a record shop, a makeup artist, people working in the charity or banking or travel sectors. It actually makes it sound like it was a really boring night out and all we did was talk about the economy. We did also talk about our best ever gigs and reality TV and all the normal things. But what is definitely true is every business at the moment is finding it a challenge. And in this climate, every business needs to acquire more customers and drive more value from their existing customers. And what is making that really, really difficult at the moment is that the cost of acquiring customers is just going up and up and up, and it's really, really hard. So why is that the case? I mean, firstly, the digital landscape is becoming more and more saturated. So there are more and more businesses vying for attention, vying for visibility, and that's driving up advertising costs, especially PPC. At the same time, all of us consumers are becoming much more demanding. So we expect personalized, relevant content and experiences. And that means for a business that it requires more sophisticated strategies, more sophisticated MarTech, which is, of course, more expensive. And then the likes of Apple, Google, Facebook are making things much, much more difficult for businesses. So phasing out of third-party cookies on Safari, that's going to be followed next year by the same thing on Google Chrome. The algorithms constantly changing, prioritizing user content over business content, the introduction of user approval for app tracking. So all of these things are making it really, really hard. More customers are using ad blockers, and the extra investment businesses need to comply with GDPR is all making it really, really challenging and really expensive. But despite all of that, proportionately, businesses are still spending a huge amount more on acquiring customers than they are in converting customers or converting the visitors that are coming to their website. So, as this slide demonstrates, the spend is massively disproportionate. And we believe that's a massive missed opportunity. And it's even more of a missed opportunity at the moment, we think, because of the increasing sophistication of the CRO and experimentation tools that are available at the moment. So it should be, as this slide says, even easier to drive a return on investment on those activities. For those businesses that are already sort of drinking this Kool-Aid, you can see that they're able to drive a return on that investment. So it's a really important opportunity to be able to look at the tools that are available and review them. And I think, as will be part of the discussion, there's a couple of tools that are sunsetting, Google Optimize and Oracle Maximizer. So it's a really important time to be able to review what's right for your business and how you can help drive that type of return on investment. So ultimately, I think I'll turn to megawatt smile digital marketing guru Brian Eisenberg. It's much, much easier to double your business by doubling your conversion rate than it is by doubling your traffic. And the reason why is because CRO can do things like increase your average order value, drive repeat purchases, improve customer satisfaction, build leads, reduce the sales cycle, optimize your marketing spend, get more value out of MarTech investments. So ultimately, it's about increasing revenue and decreasing cost. So in our report, we focus on the tactics and strategies by which we can do that. That's going to form a lot of the discussion of the panel that's about to kick off. And perhaps we'll talk about some of the case studies, I'm sure, in the panel. One that will probably sit outside of that, but is still one of my favorites, this well-worn example that Google decided to test over 50 different shades of the blue that they use for the ad links on Gmail and Google search results. By doing this, they established that a slightly more purplish shade of blue converted better than any other shade, and that's helped them drive an extra $200 million of revenue every year because of that experiment. Now, that's probably peanuts to Google, but I think most of us here would probably happily take an extra 200 million in these troubled times. On that note, I will hand back over to Rosie and to our expert panel to discuss how they're going to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. So time for our second poll. It's a big topic, I think, at the moment within the community is, do you feel that your business embraces a culture of experimentation? Something that we're going to get our panelists to touch upon, and perhaps some advice around that slightly later as well. So I just give that a moment to give people to answer that one. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, some mixed results here. Great to see a few people saying, yeah, absolutely. Business does embrace that culture of experimentation. Some somewhat, others no. Don't worry, we've got a few strategies and tactics that we can help you with that as we get into the discussion. So, as Matt has touched upon, I think it's fair to say that 2023 has been a challenging year in many respects for brands. And I think with that, we're seeing a lot of digital teams are really feeling the pressure to achieve more with less, be that through marketing budget cuts, freezes on more large scale digital transformation projects. And I think, perhaps there's also that element of there being a shift towards continuous improvement and ongoing product development over these one-off huge transformational projects. So what we're here to talk about today is that actually, is this, a fantastic opportunity for CRO and marketing professionals to maximize the value of their current MarTech investments, reduce risk and drive conversion through optimization. So I'm really, really delighted to be joined by a panel of experts to discuss how senior marketers can leverage CRO to drive growth. And joining me is Jess Speary, who is Senior Optimization Specialist at Currys, Tommy Kerr, Digital Experience Lead at NatWest, Simon Cully, Senior Digital Customer Experience Manager at Mazda, and John Kelly, Experience Director at Candyspace. So welcome. To start us off, my first question for you guys is, I guess, with the significant uplift in results that CRO can bring, can you each share an example of how CRO has driven growth for your business and delivered ROI? So Simon, I'll come to you first. How's that working for you at Mazda?
Hello, everybody. Interesting question and very good one. So Mazda, we've had a program of optimization now probably for about 2 years. We're responsible for a number of platforms. We run our national platform, we've got an e-commerce platform, and we also host and run with you good people 72 dealer website platforms. So we've got a lot of flexibility to run sort of CRO across those platforms. I think in the time that we've been working on optimization, we've done many different sort of targeted testing on various pages and various aspects. And I think that one of the biggest challenges in terms of the growth opportunity that we see is how we optimize from a mobile perspective. I think mobile presents us with the biggest challenge, with 60% of our traffic predominantly on our dealer websites coming from a mobile environment. And I think certainly from our point of view, one of the sort of examples that we would use of what's really helped us is we just noticed with the tools that we have within our tech stack that we just weren't getting scroll depth on our dealer websites on a mobile format. So we weren't exposing and haven't been exposing users to poor conversion points, either to various parts of the website or to contact opportunities to convert into leads for our dealers. So for us, trying to use CRO has been very important for us to try and drive a better improvement of contact opportunities. And the work that we've done on that is just really using mobile as a think first opportunity in the way that we do that. So we created for this example a hypothesis that how could we drive people to different users, to different parts of the website and links to the homepage, certainly thinking through a mobile lens. And certainly what we've managed to do with that is just by using the power of the tools that we've got and looking at through a mobile lens, we've been able to sort of use CRO very powerfully to now increase exposure by adding quicker links higher up the page by up to 50% in some cases to where we've been able to optimize. So for me, that's been very important because we have a fair responsibility to our dealers running 72 platforms to be seen that we're trying to maximize the opportunity for them in driving as many conversion points as we can.
Brilliant, that's great. I guess you can have amazing content, but if it's far down the page and people aren't getting there, what's the point,
Certainly, yeah.
Great. Tommy, I'll come to you next. What value are you seeing at NatWest?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll touch on more around the kind of organizational structures rather than specific examples on this. But for us, it sits at the heart of what we do for one, rather obvious reason, right? In that if we are not understanding the impact through experimentation, right, of the things that we put live, the things that we put in front of customers, then by definition, as human beings, there will be instances where we're inadvertently damaging things, right, in our efforts. So for me, CRO sits as an insurance against bad decisions, in terms of how we do things, ensuring that we validate as we go. And there's probably, in terms of examples of how to do that, key things for us are, firstly, that we are testing the right things rather than just stuff, because I think it's easy for any organization to fall into the traps of, let's change the color of this button. And that's not to play down the Google example, which is a very good one. Or let's try this, finger in the air type testing. So if we can put at the heart of it a data-led approach, which is validated through experimentation, so that we understand firstly the customer impact and of course the business impact in terms of ROI, then I know it feels like an obvious point, but we kind of move away from that culture of just hoping for the best, which I think when a culture like that's ingrained, you do see, the customer experience will drift in the wrong direction. So yeah, I think definitely it's about volume of testing in places, but of quality of testing and ensuring that you're getting into the right spaces to be able to lead that culture of actually experimenting in the first place.
Sounds great. Definitely moving from that culture of like guesswork to data-informed, data-driven decisions. Yeah, wonderful. And Jess, what's your experience over at Currys of this?
Yeah, so I'd say my answer is very similar. So with CRO, you're embracing this kind of continuous cycle of constantly learning and building on every test. So with that naturally does come growth. You're allowing the users to show you exactly what they want. So it means that the things that you do eventually push to production should ultimately be things that are more performant, high quality, have a better user experience. And that's because you've done your research to be data driven in what you're testing. And you've got your test results to show you're implementing something that does have a positive impact on your KPIs. And you've got a process to filter out changes that would actually have had a negative impact if you'd not tested them.
Definitely. It's almost as a way like risk mitigation before, pushing those changes live to see what works and what's really going to have, the greatest impact for your users. Great. John, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I guess I come from the other side, from the agency side, where actually, as Matt mentioned, in these kind of economic times, it's becoming more and more pertinent that we are able to, justify the things that we do in a way that, that really, that if a client or a brand is going to spend money, then they are looking for the return on their investment. And I would say, out of all the things that we do, experimentation, conversion rate optimization is one of those things where it is most easy to demonstrate to senior stakeholders and to the business the value and that ROI and that transparency is really, really helpful when you're trying to sort of spread the culture around businesses, and certainly just obviously it's difficult to go into specific numbers, but we have a CRO campaign or a retainer that we're working with, a customization of clothing kind of e-commerce website, and certainly we've just embarked on that. We're about 6 months in, but from the 3 winning experiments that we've had in this first 6 months, and just to be caveat, obviously every experiment doesn't win, but we're already on kind of roughly a 5-6 times ROI for the annual experimentation budget for that client in the first 6 months. So you can see that, there is this return on investment. I would just say that, you have to be patient. It takes time to bed in and make sure that you get that understanding of the platform and the website and obviously the users. But certainly it's one of those things that we find from an agency perspective, most easy to justify the value as you see that coming back in ROI.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. And I guess we kind of already started to touch upon it, but a lot of brands, they do focus on experimentation solely through the lens of conversion rate optimization, and I guess driving revenue, as we've discussed. And I get that it's important with any marketing activity that we need to be able to prove the value and effectiveness of this against the core business outcomes that you're looking to drive. I guess my next question is, beyond increasing conversion, what are the other business benefits and value in experimentation that you see? And Tommy, I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah, so I think for me, like we put it quite simply as helping people to think like scientists, right? So through experimentation, you're being curious, you're building hypotheses that you will then create evidence for. You're considering problems in a scientific way in terms of proving the value from them, which we talk about it through A/B testing, right? But that's probably a useful skill to have culturally across the organization anyway, whether you're talking to the customer facing journeys or process or anything really. So I think definitely useful for that perspective. And John's just talking to the quiet part out loud, right? Not all experiments win, and definitely the same in our space. And I touched on before talking about an insurance against bad decision. And I think what we've increasingly found with experimentation, and it's not about the happy path of found a problem, created a treatment, fixed it, and drove ROI, drove increases in conversion. A lot of the time, increasingly, it's about stopping the things that should not be in front of customers, validating them in a different way, and actually taking joy in saying, listen, pats on the back all round. It wasn't a kind of linear, old school win, for want of a better phrase. Instead, we found something that actually, had we swapped it in, you would have talked, you could talk to commercial impacts, NPS impacts, whichever metric you're talking to, you would have seen damage to that. So I think it's wider than, there's always a risk that a CRO team is seen as just, and I mean just in a positive sense, but just an A/B testing team. And I think it's more about actually how you build the mindset to, quite simply, I mean, we talked to it as, how do you help people find and fix customer pain points? Because when you speak in those terms, you're then able to let people realize that it's not some opaque thing that they are unable to do, that it should actually sit, that mindset should sit at the heart of almost everything that they do in a product role or a marketing role or wherever. So that would be my perspective on it.
Thank you. Absolutely. Jess, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Tommy said about the aspect of risk mitigation, because I think there's so much more to CRO than just increasing conversion rate. And I think that's why you see it pop up on LinkedIn so much. Like, should we be called conversion rate optimization? Should we be called experimentation or whatever else? And I think there's multiple areas that you can look at your tests into. They might be to earn and to drive an increase in conversion, but then they might just be to learn and gain insight from, which might feed into further work, or a team might need you to demonstrate the benefit of something or quantify what a potential risk might be. There are some things that just have to be done sometimes. So it can be about reducing the impact that they might have.
One additional one, Rosie, through a slightly different lens, for us in financial services as well, and which has been another buy-in, it's just considering almost the regulation, whichever space that you're in, right? So for us, we have new regulations around consumer duty. We're a heavily regulated industry in financial services anyway. And what we've been able to do is make the point that if we are duty bound for fair customer outcomes, and we have to, within that duty, demonstrate the impact on the customer at every stage of everything we do, from creating processes, creating products, then for me, if you're not experimenting and doing that, then how are you proving the value? What is it that you're relying on? So we've been able to come in at a slightly different angle around, with people who maybe don't have a natural home for experimentation, but to get buy-in through that lens of saying, listen, you kind of really should be doing this because it's the right thing to do. So just a slightly different flavour on that one.
Definitely, that's really interesting. Yeah, John, what are your views on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, from our perspective, I think where we've seen sort of byproducts or interesting things around just increasing conversion is where we've had the liberty to be able to test things that are potentially quite costly to develop and really plumb into a CMS or a client's platform, but we are able to use a front-end override, for example, to try to quickly mock up and kind of do a bit of a smoke test of what something might function like, and enable to present something to the customer just to get a little bit of feedback as to how do they respond to it, a little interactive component or something like that is just really front end. And actually, with some of these things, which has been interesting and it always surprises, is you have a real confidence that this thing is a really great idea. It's you've done user testing around it and it's tested really well, and then you create this experiment and actually clients don't really respond, or sorry, customers don't really respond to it in the way you expected. And the great thing about that is that we've managed to test something and let it fail fast with minimum kind of expenditure and investment, and we can move on to something else. And sometimes I think just being able to minimize risk of building the wrong thing can be just as valuable as increasing conversion as well.
Absolutely. Well, hold that thought around experiments perhaps not quite going to plan, because I know I'm very keen to touch upon that later with you guys. And Simon, finally, how's that working for you guys at Mazda? What are your thoughts on that?
For us, beyond just increasing conversion, it helps us manage business expectations as well. We run a number of platforms and we get a lot of input on content that we serve, and sometimes it's very subjective about content people either do like or don't like. So in the past, before we started doing any sort of CRO or any sort of testing, it was very much a case of we'd respond to the requests of the stakeholder that we would serve different content or change things around. We now take a step back, really. So before we will make any changes against any requests, and as I said earlier, we've got 72 dealer website platforms, so we get a lot of input from dealers. We will actually take a step back and try and validate what that dealer is requesting by using optimization activity. So we've had input from dealers not liking certain user journeys because that's the user journey they take. And with the tools that we've got, we've been able to go away, have a look, validate if that's a legitimate change that we need to make, and then either counter it with data. So for us, it's quite powerful beyond just optimizing conversion to validate content requests, and also is it personal preference or user behavior that needs to drive that. So it gives us more powerful data to make more informed decisions, and as I said at the start, it helps us manage the expectations of what we need to deliver. And I think someone said earlier, a safety net. So we're not just saying we're not agreeing with you. It's a case of we're not recommending we should do that because this is what the data is telling us.
Yeah, it's really interesting, sort of removing sort of biases and opinions from things, and like you said, putting it forward as a recommendation, because there's so many different facets, I guess, of user experience that we do need to consider just beyond simple A/B tests and the experimentations. Yeah, I guess also some really interesting points there around perhaps some of the often overlooked benefits around cost savings that experimentation can provide, and how we can prevent, I guess, time lost going down rabbit holes developing features that your customers just don't want, or they just don't need. And seeing experimentation to mitigate risk. I'm hearing from a few of you as well. Interested to know, how would you say experimentation has changed the way in which you make decisions as a digital team, and has it given you greater confidence over the decisions that you've made? And I'll come to you first on this one, Jess.
Yeah, so for me, it's all about throwing everybody's opinion out the window and being more data driven. I think people love to throw around something as best practice, or this is a no-brainer. But I think anyone in CRO can tell you, like Jonathan just said, like, you never know how a user is going to react to something. And that's why A/B tests fail all the time. I won't say fail, because those failed tests actually are where you sometimes get the best learning. But there are things that might seem like an obvious winner, but then the results say that the users completely reject it. And I think that's because we all have our own user base, our own product offering. The different people that we serve behave differently and have different expectations. I think experimentation means, we can be sure that those changes are right for our specific user. And I think if these changes were one size fits all, then we'd all have exactly the same website. And it's not just about that. If you want to be industry leading, you've got to go above the standard of what all your competitors are doing. And I think that's where experimentation comes in, because it means you can be bolder with your changes, because you can test them. If they don't work, you can just iterate, or you can move on, which I guess then goes back again to the risk mitigation point, that you can test these big bold things without spending the money hard coding them.
Absolutely. Thank you. Simon, what are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely given us greater confidence when we make our decisions. It gives us a much more solid base of validation. I think certainly when we have sessions from an internal meeting or agency sessions with you guys, we regularly talk about any testing and experimentation that we can do to look at sort of site improvements. And I think for me, when we run a number of sites on behalf of other dealers, where we regularly do, it gives us that benefit where we can got multiple platforms where we can definitely do sort of an A/B delta test. And I think it's just great going into sessions with individuals or with dealers, actually being able to use the solid basis of data and insight to say, well, the reason we do this is because we do this because this data tells us. So it's nice going into sessions with that validation and confidence that the work that you've done and the reason you've taken steps is off a really solid foundation. And I really look forward to when we get feedback on certain tasks and tests that we do, because it's something that Jess said, it's good learning from a failure as much as a success. Sometimes the success is something that just validates something you thought would happen anyway. And sometimes when you don't get the expected result, result, I think it drives a greater sense of urgency that you've got a solution that you've got to solve, whether that's a user journey, a dead end, or a conversion point. But I like the confidence that it installs within you as an individual, knowing that you've got flexibility when you're presented with problems, that you can go away and look at it very proactively and come up with really data-led insights and validation to what you do next.
I like that, being comfortable with failure and then saying, okay, what have we learned from that? How is that going to inform future tests that we do, and take it from there? It's almost like the first step on that journey in many respects. Great. Tommy, what are your thoughts on that? How's that changed for you, NatWest?
Yeah, I think it's a game changer, right? So the way I look at it is there are a couple of levers of control, as I call it, that you want to consider within this, right? And for us, it centers around enforcing standards, right, as a CRO team. And this depends on how you're set up as a business, right? But firstly, in terms of, and Jess touched on this, opinion-led testing, right, which has had its day. Humans think they know best. They think they're the customer when they're internal as well, when they're not. So by allowing them to just take a punt, the game's up with that approach. It will not drive the right ROI. So the first thing is to have the right lever of control around validation of your hypothesis, right? So that means a central CRO team, or however you're set up, actually getting eyes on it and saying, is this informed by data? Whether it's a research paper, whether it's web analytics data, that's the first thing you want to exert control over to ensure that you're moving towards the right changes. And then second to that is the result, right? Now, the elephant in the room with CRO over the years has been that people shout about wins that are not statistically significant. Again, it's a human behavior. You want to look good. Look at this thing I did. And in reality, is it driving a statistically significant level of confidence? A lot of the time, no. So for us, we have our minimum standards around that, 90%, 95% plus ideally, but we want to be sure that when we are ready to swap the change in front of customers, in front of all visitors or a specific segment, you want to have a level of confidence, back to the question, in that decision. And so I think sometimes you need to be, when I say enforce, it doesn't have to be heavy-handed, but you do need to call out when those standards aren't being met. And sometimes it will still be a useful exercise in gathering data, but it can't be talked to as something that is, definitely driving business value, for example. So I think in using that, you ensure the decision's right. By experimenting in the first place, you ensure that you're going to come to a decision which is positive. But I also think it's sometimes, if you've got someone that's against experimentation, it's quite a silly thing to be against, isn't it? And you can often spotlight on that saying, okay, so you are doing that without any level of validation. You're spending that money without really knowing. So sometimes you can spotlight in more subtle ways on it around the decision point. But I think there's a lot to be said for ensuring that you've got the right standards. And yes, allowing for self-service on some of this and empowering people, that's massive, but not as a kind of free-for-all where you lose track and you end up, again, just testing stuff as opposed to the right stuff, so to speak.
I get that, being quite sort of ruthless and objective in terms of the confidence levels and being like, right, that's it, sort of moving forward with those decisions. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this next question, I guess, is a really hot topic within CRO and experimentation at the moment, and something we've discussed in our recent report around how marketers can get the most out of CRO. And it's, do you feel that your business embraces a culture of experimentation and promotes taking that experiment first mindset? And as we set the poll at the start of this webinar, and I'm sure there's lots of people on here, on this call who are perhaps struggling with that. So I guess as well, it'd be wonderful to hear from you guys if you do have any advice to other CRO and digital marketing professionals who are perhaps struggling to get senior leadership or perhaps even just wider stakeholder buy-in across teams, how you'd navigate that. And Jess, I know you had some really interesting thoughts that we featured in our report on this, so I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think every business that I've worked for so far has had good intentions when it comes to CRO, but I think they've all had different levels of success, and I think that's down to the buy-in. So it's something that comes up a lot. As you said, it's a hot topic at the minute, building a culture of experimentation. But I do think, and the way that it's talked about, I do think it's unrealistic to expect a single CRO team to facilitate building this culture. I think we do need an environment where everyone wants to be data-driven and learn and grow and share insights and collaborate, but the buy-in needs to be there from the top down to encourage and support that. I think the culture is so important to the success of an experimentation team. And we work with so many different teams that there are so many different points where conflict can happen. And I think we need to build those relationships, encourage collaboration, and just show the rest of the business the benefits that we can bring. And we can do that through our insights and our test results. I think senior stakeholders don't really care about sample size and statistical significance, but they do talk money. So, show them the benefit you're driving with your wins. Show them the potential losses that you've saved them from by testing. And I think slowly over time, you're going to bring everybody on board when you're showing them those pound signs and how it's directly affecting them.
Definitely. And Tommy, you had some great thoughts that we were discussing the other day around how we can break down barriers and essentially democratize CRO across the business. And perhaps you could touch upon that.
Yeah, and I mean, to the question of do we have an experimentation culture, I think yes, actually, people are very keen to embrace it, not just in terms of customer-facing journeys, but just broader than that. Again, because it's a good soundbite. I think sometimes how it works in practice is the kind of more difficult part. In terms of getting buy-in, right? We talk about, particularly when you're recruiting in the CRO space or trying to drive up that capability, you talk a lot about the data capability, usability testing, and all the things that come with it. But actually, one of the biggest ones is the people skills, right, of conversion optimizers and how they find the right pockets, the right conversations to begin talking about it and to begin influencing. So I'm not going to pretend that if you've got opposition from your chief executive to doing experimentation, to conversion optimization, that you spin up a PowerPoint and you do an experiment and you win hearts and minds, and then it's happy days. They spend the right level of money on it, right? So I'm not pretending there's a silver bullet. But back to the people skills point, you need to consider the what's in it for me, for the relevant stakeholder, the relevant person that might be holding the purse strings on, allowing for greater experimentation activity, and talk to them in their language. I think it's about finding some type of environment to begin experimenting and to begin sharing those results. And sometimes we talk about being the pest in the room at NatWest, which is, as a CRO person, being the person that steps up and says, listen, is this the right thing to do? Leading on data, saying data's telling us it's not, or if they're about to go live with a new tool, but it's not being tagged correctly to understand, which can happen in any organization. People just miss it because they're not digital first. Being in the room and saying, listen, we need to do this, we need these standards. So listen, it's the $1 million question that's asked at every panel like this, how you get buy-in. But find the space to begin doing it and to begin experimenting, as opposed to finding the reasons why the senior manager that you might be reporting into might not be keen on it. But definitely wouldn't pretend it's a simple thing and a switch and the buy-in exists. It's something to graft away on for sure.
We'd all be doing it if it was. Sometimes you've got to be that pest. I love that. Offer that different perspective for sure, definitely. And like you said, I think it comes back to that kind of shift in mindset, and actually, businesses are kind of on that maturity journey with that and changing that, and that, comes with time and patience, as you said earlier. Okay, so Google Optimize, I guess one of the most widely adopted and perhaps most accessible entry-level A/B testing tools is recently sunset. We know that Oracle Maximize is soon to follow next year. John, I'm going to come to you specifically on this one. What would be your advice for brands who are looking to select a new A/B testing tool to ensure a really smooth transition in light of those changes?
Yeah, so I think actually it's quite connected to the previous question as well, which is that as you mentioned, Rosie, around the maturity curve, depending on what the culture of the business is, the different stakeholders and the makeup of that business will kind of depend on what type of tool is best for you. But I would say, similarly to in the way to get buy-in, I think there are other tools out there. Obviously, Google Optimize was a great kind of entry-level tool, but there are other ones out there that are offering kind of free or lower cost kind of entry-level kind of solutions into the market. And I think starting small and proving it out and actually having a couple of experiments that could be don't have to be very, very intensive in terms of budget, etc., but being able to prove it out through real data and take people a little bit on the journey. I think in terms of from our perspective, those kind of real, kind of best in class, optimizely, level tools, etc., are obviously really, really great. But I would say that, they're not for everybody, depending on where you are in your maturity curve. We have various different procedures and kind of processes that we go through that will help through just Q&A and feeding out different understanding people's businesses in more detail. We can select the right tool for those different businesses based on how much traffic they've got, if they've got any kind of buy-in from leadership already, is there a business case that currently exists, etc. And to be honest, often if people are at the beginning of that maturity curve, then they sometimes need a little bit of help on that journey, just to help to build out that business case, to help to kind of set the wheels in motion. But what we do see that people are starting on, from clients starting on those kind of more entry level tools, it's often quite quickly that people begin to see the value and begin to say, okay, actually, now we can see what this stuff can do. Actually, I'm quite interested in taking the next step, increasing that functionality, going for a more sophisticated tool, and starting to move through the gears in terms of that. And that's kind of what we would usually see from a lot of different clients that we work with.
Absolutely, it's very much a journey for sure. Yeah, great. So final question before we move into Q&A. Simon, I'm going to come to you on this one. So I guess, as we know, innovation comes with its fair share of failures, as we've already discussed, and that's something that we should be embracing. Can you share with us an experience where an experiment had an unexpected result, and how your learnings from this shaped your future CRO strategy?
Thanks, Rosie. I think it's a difficult one, because I think looking through all the work that we've done, I wouldn't say there's been absolute failures, and that's not being overly sort of flippant that we haven't failed. It was trying to think of where we have the unexpected result. And I think we've had a few unexpected, very positive results where we didn't expect the impact of the change of the optimization work that we did. I mean, it comes back to what we were trying, I mentioned earlier about the work on the optimization obviously drove a massive amount of improvements for us. But one, for example, I remember that we did, where we wanted to do some changes on our platform, and we'd done some testing, and it showed that we would get a positive uplift once we go live. So we thought, hey, we've got the validation of the insight, we've got the validation of the users in testing, let's go for it. And the unexpected result was we got multiple 100% increases in exposure to conversion points outside of the example that I gave earlier. So I think for us, it's been a very positive. Well, it showed the unexpected result from that for us has been really, what's the art of the possible? If you can do this, I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes the testing that we do comes off very low basis, so you might go from 0.4% to 2%, which obviously is a huge uplift as a percentage increase. But I think it constantly validates some of the unexpected results. If that's what you can achieve, you can actually positively demonstrate to the business the power of the work that you do. And I think it links to the question that earlier about how does our business embrace experimentation. And for us, I wouldn't say outside our digital team, our business really embraces it. They don't understand it. So we very much see it as a task that we use it to validate the requests. Comes back to what I said earlier, you validate the requests. So we use it as a way to educate our audience. We get lots of people throwing requests at us, either I don't like this, I don't like that button, I don't like that journey, I don't like this image, or whatever. And they don't really understand that it's there for a reason, and there's data that supports it. So I think what we try and do with all the work that we do and all the examples and where we try and succeed and fail, sometimes we get an instruction that we have to change content, where I don't care what your data says, you're changing it. And that to me then provides us an opportunity. Well, right, let's test it. That's the next experiment. We've been given content that we don't want to put live because we can't validate it. So let's put it live and use that as the validation to see how well it performs. So, and sometimes that provides us with where the success is a failure, because people aren't using the basis of any insights or data to say, Simon changes on the platform, I just want to see that image there. Great, okay, we'll do that. Then we can use that as a positive basis to feedback on how well it performs.
Definitely, that's certainly a common theme that I'm hearing from all the panelists today, around making those validating ideas and making really data-driven decisions going forward. Very conscious of time. I know we could continue talking about this all day. I can see we've had some questions that have come in. So one question that we've had is, CRO can be quite a lengthy process to achieve results. Are there any tips that you have on how to run more time-efficient tests? Who'd like to take that one?
I can take that one. So I think for me, it's like in some businesses, depending on your volume, you can probably come to actual statistical significance relatively quickly. But I think the key point is there are no shortcuts to get into that point where you've got confidence, right? You know, even if statistical significance could be achieved in a couple of days, there's often merit in allowing the seasonality of the week, for example, the days of the week, the consumer behavior to be teased out by keeping it live a little bit longer. And like I said before, if you have a very short window of time and it's a couple of days to do it, then you will still gather useful data. You will just probably have a reduced level of certainty as to whether it's definitely the right way to go in terms of a decision point. But it certainly doesn't have to be. I think if you're homing in on opportunities that are going to take 6 months to get to a level of confidence, then you're probably focusing on the wrong opportunities, because there's likely to be greater volume there. I'm saying this not knowing the business that the individual's in, right? But you should kind of size correctly, prioritize correctly based on where you might be able to achieve that level of confidence, would be my advice.
Great. Would any other panelists like to add to that?
I can.
Go on, Jess, you go.
Yeah, okay. So not everyone has the luxury of having a lot of traffic going to all their tests. So I think this is a scenario where you either need to be a lot bolder with your tests and the things that you're testing aren't impactful enough, or maybe look at what other metrics you can use. If conversion rate is not feasible, can you look for this area? Can you test funnel progression, and can you test other things that might reach significance a bit more quickly if conversion rate isn't feasible?
Great. Simon, what are your thoughts?
I'll go with Tommy on the scale of it as well. I think certainly in starting with small experiments or large experiments, you'll always learn in one way. And I think you have to be very clear on what you're looking to test and change. It could be a color button. It could be a module being pushed further up the page. Any change that you make or any update that you give, as long as you can measure it, you've got testing. So I think you can start as very small scale as you want, or you can, and depending on how big your tech stack is, you can go very deep in terms of looking at onward user journeys, etc., etc. But in terms of the scale of any experiment or testing, that I don't think there is a determination on scale, because any testing gives you a result that you can react to.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we've had another question come in. John, I think this is certainly one for you. Somebody has asked, are there any tools you would recommend for a business at the very start of its CRO journey?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Difficult. I mean, I think that it's not necessarily sort of a one size fits all approach. It depends on a number of things around how what the business is and what they want to achieve. But I would say some of there are some free options out there, VWO, etc., and others that offer a sort of free tool on a subset of traffic. What I would say though, and what we see in terms of other clients that we've worked with, is that depending on the level of traffic, and if you've got a large amount of traffic, for example, 500,000 plus uniques a month, then often, even those kind of lower cost tools can start becoming quite expensive, because they're all based on traffic, really. And I think that, what we have seen is that clients are at the start of their journey, but they have just got large traffic. Often they can start a little bit higher up the kind of on those more sophisticated tools, but just using them in a way in terms of with more simple experiments to kind of like tease into it, because actually after a certain number of traffic, then these tools become a little bit more comparable. I would say that, as I said, we have a series of questions to assess the maturity of a business based on a number of different factors in terms of the teams, as I said, the kind of the actual platform, or that they're on from a technology perspective, and the traffic, etc. And those things all feed into it. I would say there isn't a one size fits all approach, but there certainly is free options out there if you just wanted to test the water. And if you are you have a platform that has a lot of traffic already, then often you can start a little bit higher up and you can start to get that value straight away.
Great. I think we've come up to time. I think we've actually gone slightly over time. I know we could talk about this all day. I will just sort of leave us to say, if you're interested to find out more, as we've mentioned a couple of times, we've recently released a report detailing how to get the most out of your CRO program. And we've got some really specific guidance around CRO to supercharge product-driven, content-driven, and lead generation digital products. So we've got, I think I've just seen it posted into the chat below. There's a link to that, featuring some of the fantastic views from some of our panelists today and some other marketing leaders as well. So that just leaves me to say thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thanks for tuning in.